Welcome to the OK Let's Learn podcast. This is two podcasts in one where we dive into tons of different topics, and one where we just dive into tons of great stories and books. My name is Kevin O'Keefe. So today, let's learn all about honeybees. Yes, those bees that produce honey. They're so interesting. And I'll say this up front, there's so much to learn about them, and it's very interesting. You talk about an insect that has been studied until the cows come home. Wow. So let's start off with the fact that there's 20,000 species of bees out there. We think of bees, we think of honeybees, we think of those yellow jackets, right? But there's tons of different bees. I mean, some of the ones we know are bumblebees, carpenter bees, killer bees, you've heard of them. But listen to this: mason bees, leafcutter bees, mining bees, sweet bees, longhorn bees. Just know that when we talk about bees, most bees are solitary, meaning they live alone and raise their young by themselves. 90% of all bees are solitary. But not honeybees. They are social insects. They like to stay together, and they do stay together. It's not a matter of preferring. They do stay together. Their organizations, their community, they call them colonies, bee colonies. So a colony can have up to 20 to 60,000 bees that are working together. Yes, that's right. I just said that number. It seems almost impossible, but they are all together. They pack in really close together. And where they live, their nest, for lack of a better word, is called a beehive. One of the reasons it seems almost impossible to have that many bees together in a beehive is we don't see them. They prefer the dark. They are in little crevices, little nooks and crannies, wherever you can't see them. And the honeycombs, they're hexagons. They're six-sided shapes where they can all fit in together. And in nature, they're mostly hanging out in hollow trees or like holes in between cliffs. Bottom line, they got to have some empty spaces inside, whether it's your house, your attic or chimney, unfortunately, or just out in nature so that they can have protection from the elements, rain, wind, and of course, predators. So what does the beehive actually look like? Well, here's the nice metaphor. If you're approaching a tree, a hollowed out tree, you know the bee colony is in there. You open up the doors to the tree, and there they are. The honeycombs are a closet full of hanging coats. Yes, those honeycombs are hanging coats. They hang down from the rod, from the top to the bottom. Now imagine those coats are made of wax and obviously full of these tiny hexagon rooms. That's your honeycomb hanging inside your tree. They're close enough together, but not that close enough. The bees are able to move between coats in their hive. And here's the other amazing part. Each coat, you got to picture this. The front side of the coat, the right side of the coat, let's say, as you're looking at it from outside the closet, filled with honeycombs. The back of the coats, the left side of the coat, filled with honeycombs. So immediately you get the picture of how many bees can be packed tightly into this small space. I mean, here's one more metaphor. It's important to understand this. It makes it come alive and you can understand it. These coats in your closet, think of them as frames, a picture frame that you would be pulling up, right? Those are the apartment buildings. The whole hive, the whole closet is like this tiny bee city. So the cells and the front and the back of that frame, of that coat, are like the rooms. And the spaces, of course, between each of the coats, between each of the frames, are like the streets. Bees are constantly moving up and down the streets, and they're heading into their little apartment buildings, and they're heading into their rooms. The honeycomb cells be in the rooms. The babies are growing in there. The honey is being stored in there. And the pollen's being stored in there. And we'll dive into this in a little bit. So now that we have a good idea of what these colonies, these cities look like and their homes look like with the beehives, inside the entire colony, there's 3 types of bees, and each has a special job. Number 1, the queen bee. It's the only queen bee. There's one. Her main job is simple, but very important. She lays all the eggs. And yes, she can lay up to 1,000 to 2,000 eggs in a single day during the busy season. We could do a whole episode on the queen bee, but just know that she is in charge. She actually emits these special chemical signals that keeps everyone in line. And she can live up to 2 to 5 years. Then you have the worker bees. Most of the bees in the colony are worker bees. And yes, they're all the ladies. They do all the work. And yes, we will talk about this, but the guys, what are they doing? They're just hanging out. They're laying down on a sofa playing video games. And the ladies are doing all the work, which is typical, right? But here's what's interesting. The worker bee's job changes as she gets older. The younger worker bees start with the inside jobs, cleaning the hive, feeding the babies. They're like baby nurses. Remember, the baby bees, they're known as larvae, more than one larva. They make the beeswax. Early on in their life, they build the honeycombs and they take care of the queen. As the worker bees get older, they take on the outside jobs. They guard the hive entrance. They collect the nectar. They gather the pollen. They bring back water too, yes. And here's the sad part. In our previous episode on all about insects live, 10 months at the most? These worker bees, they only live for a month and a half, 6 weeks. And when they're outside, when you see them flying around from flower to flower, they're in the last 2 weeks of their life. So have pity on them when you see them. It truly is amazing. Now we got to go back to the guys. The 3rd type of bee are the guys, and they're called drones. And for most of my younger audience, you're thinking of drones. You're thinking of that remote control little aircraft that's buzzing around the sky. But yes, it did come from the fact that it was named after that male bee. And the buzzing you hear from bees, the loudest buzzing comes from the guys. Yes. What is their job? They don't collect nectar. They don't make honey. They don't even have stingers. Their job is basically to help the queen bee start up a new colony. They help them make the baby bees. Now, the life cycle of a honeybee. It's a complete metamorphosis, just like the butterfly. You've got initially an egg that turns into a larva, which is the baby bee. But it's like the caterpillar because it then spins its own pupa, its own cocoon, and then it's just hanging out, and then it hatches into an adult bee. So the queen lays an egg in the honeycomb cell. Remember, thousands every day. And listen to this. In about 2 to 3 days, the egg hatches into the larva, which, again, it's like a tiny worm, like a caterpillar. The worker bees feed the larva special food. Some of the larvae are fed a special diet called royal jelly, which can cause one larva to grow into a new queen. Oh boy. But after several days, the larva spins its web into a pupa, and then the pupa hatches, and it's now an adult bee. Now let's talk about how long they live. The queen bee, they can live up to 2 to 5 years. The worker bees, only 4 to 6 weeks. So you have some worker bees that are born in spring or summer, and then others are born in late autumn. The worker bees that are born in the fall, they can actually live up to 4 to 6 months. right? They have larger, stout bodies to survive the cold, and they don't go out looking for food. And so listen to this. The drone bees, the guys, they're kicked out. They live up to 8 weeks, 4 to 8 weeks, but they're kicked out. Once this wintertime comes, they are gone. The guys get no respect. It's only the late worker bees that are born in late fall that stay all winter with the queen bee. And yes, they don't hibernate. They cluster. Listen to this. They stay awake all winter. They huddle together in this big, giant, furry ball. It's like the size of a basketball around their queen. To stay warm, they vibrate their wing muscles. It's generally speaking below 55 degrees where they basically say, all right, forget it. Not hibernating. Remember, not hibernating because they're alive, but they're able to stay warm and awake because why? They have to eat. So what do they eat? They snack on the honey that they stored up all summer to keep their shivering engines and that buzzing and that warmth still running. Now, what's interesting is, unlike honeybees, bumblebees, they go into something called a diapause, which is only the queen bee bumblebee. As I'm recording this episode, the New York Times actually reported on this. A study came out that this diapause stage for the queen bee, the bumblebee, keep in mind, the entire bumblebee, I know I'm digressing here, but the entire bumblebee colony is gone. It's just the queen bee. So usually they're just burrowing into the ground, into the mud, and they're able to survive the winter. But studies have now shown that they can actually breathe and stay alive during this diapause stage, which is called overwintering, not hibernation. They can actually stay alive because for many years people thought, well, it's flooding and there's lots of water. How is it that the bumblebees, the queen bees, still stay alive? They can breathe underwater. They can breathe underwater. So this diapause stage, it's like a pause button for the bumblebee. She stops growing and her blood actually changes so she doesn't freeze solid underground. And unlike the honeybees, she doesn't move or eat at all. She stays perfectly still in a tiny hole in the dirt until the flowers bloom in the spring. Now, just to wrap up this detour here about how they live all year long, specifically in the wintertime, to make it clear, these two ways that bees survive over the winter is different than hibernation. That bears, we all know, hibernate. They're different. The hibernation is different from the bees because the bears are much bigger, and of course they don't freeze or pause their bodies as deeply as a bug. Basically, you got to think of the bear's heart as like this long nap where he beats very slowly and they breathe slowly, but they aren't paused like the bumblebee. They're just in a very, very deep sleep in a cozy, nice little den. And why and how does the bear survive? Again, with hibernation, they don't eat honey like the honeybees do. They live off the fat that they've stored in their bodies from eating lots of fish and berries and anything else in the fall. So we're off this digression for talking about how these insects survive over the winter. And again, as I'm recording this, beautiful spring day, all of a sudden, it is beautiful out, and these insects are all over the place. I haven't seen any particular bees, and what's interesting about where they appear first, right by the water, right by the stream. In my case, right by this little brook that is right near my house, and I'm just seeing these insects flying all over the place. They've obviously already hatched, and bees certainly will appear when those flowers are sprouting and when they can get out. They're a little bit later than the insects, but certainly they are ready to burst out. Now, you may be wondering, how is it that this whole process, this whole colony begins? Well, you get a new queen, and we'll get to this, right? How is it that you get a queen to begin with, right? But the queen leaves the hive with thousands of worker bees. This is called a swarm. It looks for a new place to live. Once they settle in, the worker bees build the structure that we've talked about, the honeycomb. And the honeycomb is 6 sides, as we talked about, a hexagon. And this honeycomb is made of beeswax. What's that, you're wondering? Well, it's wax that the honeybees make with their own body. They have these tiny glands, these tiny wax glands on the bottom of their abdomen, which, as you know, is the back part of their body, one of the 3 parts. Well, when the bees eat a lot of honey, their bodies turn some of that sugar into these tiny pieces of wax. The wax pieces are so small, they're like the size of a grain of rice. They take the wax, listen to this, with their legs and chew it with their mouths until it becomes soft and moldable, almost like clay. Then they shape it into these 6-sided honeycomb cells that make up the hive. It's just absolutely unbelievable that they can make all of these sheets of honeycomb from wax that they make themselves. And we've talked all the podcasts about the fact that they're so busy. That's why they call them busy bees. Their entire life they're working. No wonder they call them worker bees. Just so it's clear, I mean, when the egg is laid, it's hatched in 3 days. When the baby appears as a larva, it's only there as a baby for 6 days. Then it goes into the pupa stage, which is only 12 days, where it's hanging out, spinning its cocoon. And then day 21, 3 weeks later, it's an adult bee. And from there, it only lives a month and a half. I mean, really, what do they collect? We know this, pollen and nectar. The nectar is a sweet liquid that's made by all flowers. The bees drink the nectar using a long tongue and store it in a special place in their body called the honey stomach. The nectar is used to make honey, which is the colony's main food, as we know. In the tongue that I referenced, well, that's the straw that sucks in the nectar, and it's exactly like the butterfly. It's like one of those party blowers. When you blow into it, it unrolls and stretched out into like a long tube. Well, the proboscis, the honeybee's proboscis, works basically the same. When the honeybee is not drinking the nectar, it's coiled up like a tiny spiral under its head. But then when it finds the flower, it unrolls the proboscis and it sticks it down right into the flower to drink the nectar. And what else does it collect? It collects pollen. Pollen is the powder that's made by flowers. Pollen contains protein, which helps the baby bees grow. The worker bees brush the pollen into special baskets on their back legs. Those are called pollen baskets. Yes. When they return to the hive, the pollen is stored in the honeycomb cells and used as food for the larvae. So, nectar becomes honey, pollen becomes the protein food for the baby bees. Now, obviously, we love the honey, but this is the sustenance. This is everything that the bees eat, not only during the regular year when they're out flying and they're making their honeycombs, but especially during the winter, right? Why? Because the flowers disappear. They can't collect any nectar. So when they cluster and keep the queen bee alive, that's when they need the food, right? Because they're alive during the winter, as we mentioned, and they're keeping that queen bee nice and warm and everyone else warm. Imagine that. Now listen to this. When they find that great nectar, when they find that great pollen, they come back to the hive and they end up doing this unbelievable dance. They call it the waggle dance. The worker bee does this kind of figure 8 wiggle, moving all over the place, just waggling and wiggling all over the place. And it's so interesting because what this does, and as a side note, how is it that we figured this out? We got a lot of people in our past that we can thank for studying these bees because we know so much, as I mentioned earlier in the podcast. But this dance tells the other bees the direction of the flowers, the distance to the flowers, how good the food is, like I mentioned. And it's like, yeah, you got to go over here, around the tree, then take a left, behind the barn. I mean, imagine it. So the other bees just sit there, watch the dance, and then they go out and find that great nectar in that one nice flower behind that barn. It's really, truly amazing, as everything else is about these honeybees. Now, honey, how is it made? We talked about step 1, you collect the nectar. Step 2, you pass the nectar. So when the worker bee returns to the hive, she passes the nectar to another worker bee. Then you break down the sugars. Special enzymes inside the bees begin to change the nectar. The bees place the nectar inside the honeycomb cells, and then the worker bees fan their wings over the cells to move air through the hive. This helps water evaporate the nectar. As the water disappears, the nectar becomes thicker and thicker. Finally, it turns into honey. When the honey's ready, the bees seal the cell with a thin cap of wax so it can be stored safely. The honey obviously is now the food supply for the whole colony. Now, listen to this. I mentioned about the worker bee coming back and passing the nectar. Remember, it's got the nectar in its little backpack in its body, its honey stomach. Like half the weight of his body at this point is nectar. Well, when I talked about passing the nectar, the worker bee that comes into the colony meets a house bee. It's a younger worker that stays inside. The worker bee that collected the nectar, I'm going to call that worker bee the forager. Well, the nice way of putting it is the forager brings the nectar back up from the honey's stomach into her mouth. She passes a tiny droplet to the other bee, mouth to mouth, like they're kissing. Scientists actually call this trophallaxis. You know what, though? It's just a fancy word for throwing up. Yes, that forager bee, the worker bee, is throwing up into that house bee's mouth. Ugh. All right, sorry. But scientists like to call it a controlled transfer. And it's really not vomiting. It's not that messy. But still, this is what's happening. You may have heard about this. And the other nice way of putting it is regurgitation. And it's not over. The enzymes are being mixed in and they are transferred or regurgitated back out of the mouth from one worker bee to another, and then ultimately the final worker bee, after everything is ready, yes, throws it up back into that honeycomb cell. So if you're having some nice honey, you could just think of it in a different way, maybe. So to wrap up our podcast, let's talk about some basics that we may not have touched on and some fun facts. What do the honeybees look like? We talked about the 3 body parts. Well, they got 2 antennae. They've got 6 legs, they got 2 pair of wings, and yes, they're yellow and black stripes. Their bodies are covered in tiny hairs that trap the pollen like we talked about. And the worker bees, they're only about a half an inch long. Their fuzzy bodies help them collect the pollen, and we know how important collecting pollen is. They move from one flower to the next, and that's how flowers are able to produce seeds, and we as a species can eat. Where do they live? Very simply, everywhere. What do they eat? Well, we've talked about this the whole episode. Nectar, honey, and pollen. But no, they don't eat anything else. Adult bees mostly eat honey while the baby bees need the pollen to grow up. So some fun facts. They can beat their wings 200 times a second. To make 1 pound of honey, bees must visit about 2 million flowers. It just doesn't seem possible, but it's true. A single worker bee may visit thousands of flowers in one day. They can fly up to 15 miles an hour. I mentioned this in a previous episode. Honey never spoils. You talk about throwing out a fun fact at a party. Hey, let me know something in your cabinet. Tell me something in your cabinet, kitchen cabinet, that will never spoil, that will be good 30 years from now. And yes, it's honey. A jar of honey was found in ancient tombs, and it was still tasty. Bees, they use the sun as a compass. Imagine that. Makes sense, right? That's one thing they can depend upon that's up in the sky that can help them move around. And finally, 1/3 of all the food that people eat on this planet depends on pollination from bees and other pollinators. So bees are so important, and we hear news accounts throughout the last number of years about the population dwindling. We've got to keep them alive. So a special shout out and a thank you to all the beekeepers out there, especially George, my best friend when I was a little kid. He lived down the street and we did everything together. Well, he has a hive in his backyard and he raises bees. Now, I said before, finally, but no, not finally. We got to get back to the queen bee. Up front, you got to know that there's trillions of bees out there, trillions. The estimate is up to 2 trillion bees, over 100 million colonies. But you're saying, well, how about your average yard? Well, yeah, if you have enough flowers nearby, you could have 1 to 2 hives on your property. But very typically, we're talking about, obviously, honeybees now in terms of these numbers. And we got to get back to that queen bee. Yeah, so listen to this. The queen bee, talk about a fun fact. The queen bee is dominant. You know this, right? They're in charge. They're the bully. And how does this happen? We went back to this. Early on, some of the worker bees feed some of the larvae the special royal jelly. These chosen little larvae, they grow up and they're bigger. They're more dominant. And how is it that they take over? Because they do take over. Some of the queen bees that are on their last leg, so to speak, literally, figuratively, they're not producing enough eggs. The queen bee, the emerging queen bee, will literally go after it and kill it, or certainly send it on its way. But how is it that the other bees know this special future queen? The queen bees, and there could be several of them, because then they ultimately go off to battle in terms of deciding who's going to rule the colony. Yes, this happens. It's tough out there. You think we have it tough. They emit this pheromone, which is like this sense. They make it in their glands. Again, the special emerging queen bees. They make it in their glands and it gets onto their body. And the other bees can sense it with their antennae. So it's like, uh-oh, here comes the big new queen bee. Better stay away. Yes, this is what happens. So interesting, so fascinating. Thanks for staying with me on this journey, friends. All about honeybees. Reach out to me at kevmok21@gmail.com. You can also reach us at the Facebook group, OK Let's Learn. That's in the podcast notes. And always love the reviews and the ratings on Apple Podcast. Until next time, friends, have fun and keep learning.